Italy is set to ease some of its strict lockdown measures today. The country imposed nationwide restrictions on its population to halt the spread of the coronavirus 7 weeks ago. Parks are reopening and people will be allowed to visit relatives living in the same region. The government has promised further openings this month if the rate of new infections stays low. Italy has the second highest death toll after the U.S., with nearly 28,000 deaths out of over 200,000 cases. In a moment, we'll have more on what's set to change for Italians as the measures are loosened. But first, we look back at how the country became the first nation in Europe to be overwhelmed by the virus.
In mid-March, this was the scene at the main hospital in the northern Italian city of Bergamo. It was the epicenter of Europe's coronavirus outbreak. Over the previous 3 weeks, the number of cases had risen exponentially, and doctors were struggling to cope. Other countries were now also becoming increasingly alarmed at the inability of Italy's most affluent region to cope with the crisis. One doctor had this message for the rest of the world.
What I would suggest is just shut down to stop all the outbreak and not come in this kind of situation that is very, very difficult to manage.
For Italy, such advice came too late. So many people were dying that the army had to be called in to transport their bodies to cemeteries. And the virus was still spreading, despite the government's announcement of a lockdown in the second week of March. And this appeal to the Italian people.
It's right at this time to stay at home. Our future, the future of Italy, is in our hands. And our hands have to be responsible hands, today more than ever. Everyone has to do their part.
Italy was the first country in Europe to impose such restrictions, and they were unprecedented. Suddenly, cities such as Milan, a place known for its bustle and vigour, became deserted as people followed the order to remain indoors unless they needed to leave for work or health reasons. For the first time in decades, Venice was emptied of the millions of tourists who normally visit each year. Italy's Air Force marked World War II Liberation Day without the usual crowds on the ground in Rome. Instead, people celebrated on their balconies. But they too are now keen to be liberated from their long confinement.
For more on this story, we can speak to Dr. Marco Varga. He's an anesthesiologist and critical care physician. He also drafted a series of recommendations to help Italian doctors who are treating ICU patients. And he joins us from Turin. Dr. Varga, good to have you with us. Italy is slowly coming out of lockdown today. You have been on the front lines of this crisis. Do you think it is the right time to lift some restrictions?
Well, I think it's unavoidable because you cannot keep just people at home for months. So we are a little bit scared as healthcare professionals because our fear is that this will be like a sort of champagne cork just popping because people are really exhausted after nearly 2 months at home. So we all hope that people will be able to follow the rules, follow the existing restrictions. Not everything has been lifted up. And we are living it as a test, because if we see another exponential surge in 3-4 weeks, of course, probably the government will have to close again. So there's a lot of uncertainty. And for sure, we are a little bit tired, and some of us are really exhausted after these 2 months. Now we have a little bit of quiet in hospitals, but there's a lot of uncertainty about the future and what will happen at the end of May or at the beginning of June.
What worries you most coming out of this lockdown? Is it precisely, Dr. Varga, that you think that Italy could experience a second wave of infections?
Yeah, a second wave is expected, and what is still uncertain is the amplitude of this wave, because it could be a tsunami like the first one, and it could be just a very much more manageable wave. Now that hospitals are more prepared to treat COVID patients, and we learned quite a lot of things in the last weeks. So we are expecting to leave a sort of a plateau with small peaks, and this probably is going to happen for months, epidemiologists say. So not huge as the first wave that caught us unprepared as a society and as a healthcare system,
right.
but maybe more waves in the coming months, and unless something really a real game changer comes in, like a vaccine or a miraculous drug or something else.
And Dr. Vergano, just quickly, what is your message to Italians, also other Europeans who are starting to come out of lockdown? What's your message going forward?
Yeah, the message from me and my colleagues is just be careful. And of course, everybody of us really wants to get out and to start again a sort of social life. And there are just simple rules that we have to follow, but they are very important, like a little bit of social distancing and using your surgical masks outside and crowded places, wash your hands, and just remember that the virus has not disappeared. So we just won probably the first battle with a lot of mistakes, but this is a very long, it's like a war, and it's not won yet.
All right, Dr. Marco Varga joining us from Turin. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Now, businesses in Austria are adjusting to a gradual return to regular life. Austria is only seeing a few new coronavirus cases each day, so authorities have eased many of the national lockdown restrictions. But it's far from a return to normal. As the city of Mozart, Salzburg normally draws millions of tourists, hotels and restaurants there fear it will be a long time before the visitors return.
Finally out. For the first time after more than 6 weeks of lockdown, the Summered family in Salzburg, Austria can go to the playground together. The kids can hardly wait. I've been looking forward to the playground because you can play table tennis there and you don't have to sit around at home the whole time. For Christina Summern, the end of the lockdown is a big relief too. As a German teacher, she taught her classes online. Now she's happy that she can see her students in person again. With protection for the face and social distancing and hygiene, we'll be able to do it. I'm really looking forward to it. Life is very cautiously returning to the streets of Salzburg. But hairdressers already have their hands full. They reopened on Saturday. Keeping your distance is impossible here. For salon owner Christian Sturmeier, the new situation is a challenge. We're working on 3 floors so the teams don't have to mix. Because if someone gets infected, then we would have to immediately close up again. We're doing the best we can. You can't just stay locked up. Eventually, things will have to get back to normal. But it's clear that this normality will look different to the one that Salzburgers knew before.
Usually, this street would be packed with tourists from neighboring countries like Germany or from overseas. For the people who live here, this is a dream. They finally get to have their city to themselves. But for the many businesses that depend on tourism, the end of the lockdown is just the first step. Because what they really need is the borders to open.
This includes Andreas Gfrera. He owns the Blaue Gans, the oldest hotel in the city. He tells me in 2 weeks the restaurant will be allowed to reopen with strict hygiene regulations, followed by the hotel at the end of the month. But who is going to come? This summer will definitely be difficult. Conferences, meetings and so on have a question mark over them, and overseas markets have an even bigger one. So I don't think we will see the travel sector return to normal before 2022. Austria is taking the first steps in living life with the new coronavirus. A life which will take some getting used to.
All right, let's catch up now on some other stories making headlines around the world. Russia has registered more than 10,000 new coronavirus cases, a record one-day rise. More than half are in Moscow. The number of confirmed infections in Russia is now above 130,000. As the virus spreads, there's concern that medical facilities might not be able to cope. Greece is moving hundreds of migrants out of the notoriously overcrowded Moria refugee camp on the island of Lesbos. The refugees will be transported to the mainland because of the danger of a coronavirus outbreak on the island. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has shared more details of his COVID-19 ordeal. He says he became so sick that doctors were preparing a contingency plan in case he died. Johnson spent 3 nights in intensive care before recovering. And Germany's Cologne Cathedral has held its first Sunday service since the start of the lockdown, but the number of worshippers was limited by social distancing regulations. A safety screen separated the cardinal from the congregation. Well, there is no way to predict which, if any, of the vaccines being researched will work effectively and safely, and it could be 18 months or more before one is available for widespread use. But one way of speeding things up is to pour money into the search. That is what the European Commission's conference today is all about, as its president, Ursula von der Leyen, explained to DW.
We have to build up capacities to manufacture it, zillions of doses. And then we have to make sure that we can deploy it to every corner in the world in a fair and affordable price. And that's what exactly we're working on. For that, we need money, and we need a global cooperation.
For more on this story, we can speak to our correspondent, Bernd Riegert in Brussels. Hi, Bernd. Good to see you. We heard the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen there saying we need money and we need global cooperation. So let's start with the money, looking to collect around 7.5 billion euros. How realistic is that?
Well, the EU Commission, which is leading this effort and this unprecedented virtual pledging conference, is quite confident that the money will be there because the German Chancellor, the French President, and also the Italian Prime Minister have already committed to this effort, and they will pledge an amount of a couple of 100 million euros. And also Saudi Arabia already pledged 500 million euros. Saudi Arabia is the president of the G20 this year, of the group of the 20 most powerful nations in the world. The G20 is behind this, also the WHO, the World Health Organization, and also the United Nations itself. So the money should be there, but the EU Commission also said this is only the initial pledge. This is only the money to start the whole effort. If the vaccine is there, then you have to produce it, and then much more money will be needed.
But Bernd, what about global cooperation? I mean, the U.S. is not taking part in this pledge drive so far. How much will that affect efforts?
Well, the European Commission is, of course, regretting that the U.S. administration is not part of this. That shows that President Trump is opposing any international approach and also international institutions. But it's only the government. There are some institutions in the United States which will take part, for example, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and also the Wellcome Trust, which is dealing with vaccination. But the international community says we have to do it now and we have to do it fast. We cannot wait for the United States. And this vaccine that will be developed should belong to humanity itself, says the Secretary of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres.
And Bernd, just quickly, why is it important to the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen to have this fundraiser now?
Well, because you have to jumpstart all these initiatives around the world. 100 of them are ongoing, and they need money. And they also want to make sure that production facilities will be in place, and also the distribution of the vaccine has to be organized, and all that takes money and time. The best estimate is that only in 1 year this vaccine will be in place.
DW's Bernd Riegert reporting from Brussels. Thank you. Let's get a roundup of some of the latest pandemic news now. U.S. President Trump says he believes America will have a coronavirus vaccine by the end of the year. German Health Minister Jens Spahn is much less optimistic. He believes the race to develop a vaccine could take years. New Zealand has recorded a day with no new cases for the first time since the outbreak started, and the country is considering opening up to two-way travel with Australia. And Italy is easing some of its restrictions. Parks are reopening, and people will be allowed to visit relatives who live in their region. Now, Asian markets are down on deteriorating relations between the U.S. and China. On Sunday, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said that there was evidence that the virus came from a Chinese lab. Now, he didn't present any evidence, but traders reacted, selling off Asian currency and stocks. Shares in Hong Kong lost 4%. Markets in Japan and Singapore are down by about 3%. And President Trump has repeatedly blamed China for the coronavirus outbreak. All right, so not a very encouraging start to this month of May on the markets in Asia. Let's check in with our financial correspondent, Conrad Busen. He's at the Frankfurt Stock Exchange for us. Hi, Conrad. What effect has that had on markets there this morning?
Well, the German share market has to deal with a significant slump here this morning as well. The German share index DAX is down around 3% after the first few minutes of trading here. Of course, sell in May, go away. This old saying is on everyone's minds right now, in particular as the month of April was such a strong one for the stock market. The German DAX, for example, managed to gain nearly 10% over the month of April. Of course, now the willingness among investors is relatively high to take some of those profits off the table.
Conrad, meanwhile, Germany is slowly getting back to business. Hairdressers allowed to reopen today. Some retailers are trying to get their customers back into their shops. Is that boosting confidence?
Not really, because, you know, the restart of shops and retailers in Germany is only going so-so, I would say. If you enter a shop in Germany, you have to wear a protective mask. Some smaller shops only allow 2 clients in at a time. Many businesses struggle to find enough PPE, protective personal equipment, for their staff. So the restart is really a bumpy one. And of course, Germans are keeping their money together. They don't know what the economy will look like in the coming month, whether their jobs are certain, etc.
All right, our markets correspondent Conrad Busen reporting for us. Thank you. Now, every year, DW gives out its Freedom of Speech Award. This year, the award highlights journalists who have been persecuted because of their coverage of the coronavirus pandemic. Let's meet some of the individuals we're singling out for their courageous reporting.
Threatened, attacked, arrested. Press freedom was already a contentious and often dangerous issue in countries governed by repressive leaders. The corona crisis is giving autocratic regimes a welcome excuse to clamp down even further.
They're using the pandemic also to bring pressure on journalists. And we see this in China, we see it in Russia, in Turkey, in Iran. We see it around the globe, so that these countries, which have a very problematic attitude on press freedom, they're using this now too.
January 2020. These images were secretly shot by Chinese citizen journalist Fang Bin inside a hospital in Wuhan, the epicenter of the pandemic. His reports differ vastly from the image of the country portrayed on state television. A short while ago, I saw 3 corpses here, he says on the video. Now there are 8. Chen Guixi, a lawyer, was the most prominent citizen journalist in Wuhan.
The virus is right in front of me. China's criminal prosecutors are behind me. I'm not afraid of death. Do you think I'm afraid of you, Communist Party of China?
It was Chen Guixi's last video before he disappeared without trace, just like Fang Bin. His last footage shows police knocking at his door. DW's director Peter Limburg criticized China's blocking of investigations into the virus's origin.
And a free press would have really helped to find the reason and at the end would have saved lives in China.
In Russia, where press freedom is strictly curtailed, Government-friendly media outlets have been spreading misinformation about the corona crisis. Independent journalists are feeling the pressure. Elena Milashina, internationally renowned investigative journalist, received death threats after reporting on the coronavirus in Chechnya, allegedly from Chechen President Ramzan Kadyrov himself. The organisation Reporters Without Borders has documented a record number of arbitrary acts of violence against reporters in Venezuela. Davison Rojas was detained by special forces for 12 days for reporting on COVID-19 on social media. In countries where press freedom is already under threat, the corona pandemic is making things even more difficult and more dangerous for journalists.
Now to South Korea, which is one of the first countries to start up a major sports league again during this coronavirus pandemic. The Korean Baseball Organization is taking a number of precautions to protect the players, and fans will not be in the stands. They'll only be able to watch on TV. Still, both players and fans are ready to go.
Inside the Kium Heroes home field, players ease themselves into shape. Because of the coronavirus pandemic, they had to wait over a month. But now opening day, May 5th, is almost here. Still, because of the virus, there will be one big difference: no fans.
You know, when you're in the 6th inning, 7th inning, and you're trying to grind out and out, and you're exhausted, and hearing fans, I mean, it really does motivate you and pick you up. So, you know, not having them is going to be very, very challenging.
One-time major leaguer Jake Brigham had to undergo 2 weeks of mandatory quarantine when he came back to his South Korean team from training in the U.S. Now he just looks forward to seeing himself and his teammates back on the field when it counts.
I think a lot of people in the world will take notice just because it'll be the first sport back. So I think it's really exciting, and the guys are just ready to go.
Teams now even more carefully monitor player health, and all stadium visitors have their temperatures checked. South Korea has managed to largely bring the coronavirus outbreak under control with intense testing, contact tracing, and quarantining. With new cases now numbering usually below 10 per day, like baseball, other professional sports leagues here are opening up, although it'll be a while before there are fans in attendance. The league may gradually welcome a limited number of fans back to stadiums and remains committed to a full 144-game schedule. Special regulations aim to prevent the spread of the coronavirus during games, including no spitting. And the coaches task their teams to keep all eyes on the prize.
These actions you do without realizing. It may be tough because you break your routine, but you need to be more careful now for yourself, your team, and for the country. But if we do follow the guidelines and play well, we can reach our goal for the season to move up a level and win.
In the meantime, South Korea's boisterous fans have been enjoying pre-season outings, reluctantly making do watching games from the couch.
Compared to before, it's a bit disappointing to only be able to watch games at home because I can't see everything. I want to go to the games as soon as possible and cheer with other fans.
Like the players, fans long for the stadium atmosphere. And if the coronavirus precautions work, then their long wait may be in its last inning.